So the way that we're going to be doing this is, like last week, we'll do kind of a brief presentation from each denomination, and then there'll be a break time for you guys to formulate and ask questions, and then we'll come back together and answer those questions as best we can in the time that we have. So tonight's topic is something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's ecumenism, and if you don't know what ecumenism is, it's basically Christian churches working together. It's the desire to sit down, listen to one another, hear what each other has to say, learn from one another, and share in our common Christian mission. And I was reading something online from the United States Catholic bishops that said that they trace the beginning of ecumenism back to 1910, when the Lutherans and the Anglicans got together for a dialogue, and then we kind of jumped on later on. But the only thing that we did to participate in that was a bishop sent a letter saying, good luck! After that, we got involved too, and especially after Vatican II, there have been several documents on why it's important for us to work together. So there are lots of gifts that come from working together, and there are a lot of challenges in working together. So what I've asked our pastors tonight and parochial vicar to discuss are, what is your denomination's take on ecumenism, and what do you see the gifts of ecumenism are, and what are some of the challenges? Now, I was in a meeting in Monsignor's office this morning really, and I saw this, and I said, I have got to bring this with me, because this is what people think ecumenism is. It says, I would agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. And that's really not what ecumenism is about. It's about finding common ground, working together, and again, doing what we can to build the mission of Christ. Now, last time we had the Google Doc, so to ask your questions on. That worked for some people. For other people, you needed us to write it down, and I might be in that crowd. So just in case you do want to use it, we have a little link that you can just type into your browser on your phone, and it'll take you to this document, and you can write in your questions. But as I said, if you have any issues with that, don't worry about it. We'll be around to help you. But it's here. Okay. So our pastors and parochial vicar tonight are Pastor Pat Medley from the Lutheran Church. Clergy, okay. We have Pastor Will Wilson from the United Methodist Church. Parochial vicar, Father Arian Ward. And Pastor John Elsonson from the First Baptist Church will be joining us in just a little bit. So he's going last. But Will is going to start us off. And again, we're framing the question, what does your denomination say about ecumenism? And from a personal standpoint, what do you see the gifts and challenges of ecumenism as being? Okay, so Will, take it away.
All right, so before I get to what my denomination has to say about working together in Christian unity, let's look at Scripture in the Bible. Some of you may be familiar with Noah and the ark. I think that's the first story we all learned. But after the flood, God makes a covenant and promises that God will never wipe out the world through a flood again. That's a covenant made to all humankind, all creatures here on earth. Of course, we have Abraham, who becomes the father of the Israelite people. There's a covenant made there. And Israel is the gem of God's eye, the chosen people. But it doesn't last that way. When Jesus comes to earth, the Word made flesh, all of a sudden this promise of God, this grace is offered to everyone, not just the Jews. Of course, you see in the early church in some of the letters of Paul, you see the conflict that arises between those who are practicing Jews and then the Gentiles who come to faith. And they have to work together and find unity in their differences. And so there we have this first example of coming together through this common purpose in that Christian faith, and kind of looking past some of those differences and finding a way to live together as we see that God is working to reconcile the whole world, not just one denomination, not just one thought or people group, but that it is something for the whole world. Now, within the United Methodist Church, our theological documents state that Christian unity is not an option, it is a gift to be received and expressed. It goes on to say that we see the Holy Spirit at work in making the unity among us more visible. And then it says, as people bound together on one planet, we see the need for a self-critical view of our own tradition and accurate appreciation of other traditions. In these encounters, our aim is not to reduce doctrinal differences to some lowest common denominator of religious agreement, but to raise all such relationships to the highest possible level of human fellowship and understanding. Now, the founder of the United Methodist movement was John Wesley. He was an Anglican priest. He never was United Methodist. He never sought to create a new denomination. But within the Anglican Church, the Church of England, in 18th century England, John Wesley helped spearhead this revival movement within the church there. They had small groups, they got people together, but it wasn't to create a new denomination, it was to encourage people to grow in their faith, but to still go to the church to receive communion, to still go to services each week. And so it was never a movement to separate, but to continue to inspire greater growth in our Christian walk. But John Wesley was very ecumenical in how he developed his theology, because he was influenced by many different traditions, faith traditions. Now, being in England at that time, you had the Puritans and the Puritan thought. That was an influence for him. Of course, the Anglican tradition in which he was a priest had influences over him. He also had a little bit of Lutheran as well, with the Moravians, who he also borrowed ideas from and learned from, was in conversation with. He also studied Roman Catholic mystics and Eastern Orthodox Church fathers. So he had this well-rounded theological viewpoint that borrowed from a lot of different traditions as he tried to find a way to get back to the basics of Christianity and Christian growth and relationship, and that is carried on through our denomination, of course, with all the different schisms and things over different issues and things like that, but still trying to work together, not just as a Methodist family, but as a Christian family around the world. So some of the biggest benefits to focusing on Christian unity comes through the work of missions and the growth of the church around the world. Now, in the United Methodist Church, we have a strong growing presence in the continent of Africa. Now, in Africa, you have other Protestant traditions. You also have other faiths as well, the Muslim faith present in those areas. And so the Methodist Church works to bridge differences in trying to grow the church, but also help create peace in areas of conflict, also to work together in areas of mission. So in the Congo, they talk about sharing resources together, working for peace, that the church should speak united as one voice, and that in that way, that Christian unity gives us the best stance in creating unity and spreading this message, not only just within community, but to an entire nation. In Angola, United Methodists have worked together to create an inter-ecclesiastical committee for peace in a time of civil war, that they could come together and speak as one Christian body against what was going on in their country. So there's power when we come together, not just as this denomination or this church, but that as we speak together in one voice, it carries a much greater message to those around us. But there are challenges, of course, to getting together. There's the obvious ones of prejudice, of being closed-minded, of not being open to dialogue with others who may think a little bit different from us. But I think also in coming together in Christian unity, we have to get beyond just those conversations of, oh, what do you believe? What do I believe? But to look at what we can do together, like I said, being that one voice, to manifest that in mission and through mission. There's a bishop in Zimbabwe who said that we need to, in talking about one mission, we need to drill water holes in communities so that people of all faiths have clean water. They said before, God is working to restore the whole world. And so all of our efforts should be looking to all people, not just what benefits us, but what benefits everyone, so that all may come to see the salvation that God is bringing to the whole world. And so that's why we come together and why we focus on being one body and finding ways where we can work together and not be divided.
So when I think about what the advantages of ecumenism are, I can speak very personally. I grew up in Baltimore. My mother was raised Presbyterian. My father was raised Mennonite in a Union church in Japan. They raised us Lutherans. Some of our relatives were Lutherans. I had siblings who became Roman Catholics, that were fundamentalists, that became Roman Catholics. We have quite a Heinz 57 varieties family. As a young person, I always wanted to serve Jesus. And in the Lutheran Church, girls couldn't do that. We couldn't be acolytes. We couldn't be altar servers. And my Catholic friends were afraid to come to my church. And I was afraid to go to a Catholic church. Although I had a lot of curiosity about my friends' churches, we kind of believed that if we went into each other's churches, something bad would happen to us. It was forbidden. That was just the way that it was. And I'm over 65, so this is a long time ago, before Vatican II. But those were the bad old days. You know, ecumenism was not happening, really. When I got my first Bible in 3rd grade, I read Jesus calling the disciples and the words lifted off the page. I just wanted to serve Jesus. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I went to a Lutheran college, Muhlenberg College, studying to be a high school French teacher and a German teacher also. And in 1970, the Lutheran Church decided to ordain women. But the Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia, the Lutheran Theological Seminary there, wouldn't let women live on the campus yet. And I didn't want to be, you know, one of those students that lived off campus and was bused back and forth on a minibus. So my Greek professor at Muhlenberg, because I took Greek and Hebrew to prepare for seminary, said, go to Princeton, which is a Presbyterian seminary. One of the best things I ever did was going to a seminary not of my denomination. Although there were many, many Lutherans on the faculty, what I had to do almost every day of my life there was explain what is a Lutheran, because they didn't really know what Lutherans believed. And I learned a great deal about the other denominations that were represented there. The second largest student group at Princeton Seminary at that time was Roman Catholic priests and nuns taking higher education programs. So I had lots of male priest friends who wanted to teach me to play bridge. And if I learned to play bridge, I probably wouldn't have graduated. The other thing that happened while I was at Princeton was I met my husband, who was a Baptist. A Lutheran and a Baptist? I said, this will never work. He was studying at the Ecumenical Institute at Marseille in Switzerland for a year. My first year, so my first year of seminary was his year between his middle and senior year. He was away studying ecumenically. Some of the students at Princeton had said, write to us in French. So he's writing these letters in French, and they couldn't translate them. So I had been a French major, right? I said, oh, let me translate these letters for you. And then the following year, he was back on the campus, and we met, and it took me a long time to put two and two together. This was this man who had written these beautiful letters in French,
And one thing led to another, and we were engaged while I was on my intern year. And that marriage that everybody said would never work, we've been married 43 years now. And we have two beautiful children. Both were raised Lutheran because my husband became the head of all of the American Baptist churches in the U.S. He was the chair of the National Council of Churches of Christ in the USA, and he is currently the head of the office that publishes the new RSV version of the Bible, the Revised Standard Version of the Bible. He also chairs the Ecumenical and Interfaith Office of the Baptist World Alliance. So as a clergy spouse, I've had an opportunity to travel with him to many different ecumenical conferences and to attend North American Baptist Fellowship and Baptist World Alliance meetings. As chair of the Committee on the Reception of the Report of our presiding bishop at one of our national Lutheran assemblies, I urged our bishop to seek ecumenical interface with Baptists, largest denominations. If you gather up all the Baptists in the U.S., one of the largest denominations in the U.S. Of course, it's more than one denomination. Baptists are very often congregational. So I could, if John Elson's son, Pastor Elson's son didn't show up, I could speak pretty well about Baptists. But the Baptists couldn't figure out who could speak for them. So our question about having Lutheran Baptist dialogue turned into the Baptists having their first dialogues among themselves, all the different kinds of Baptists that there are in the U.S., and that was a good thing. The Lutheran Church considers itself a reforming movement within the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We use the word Catholic with a small c. The word Catholic means universal, inclusive. The word ecumenical comes from the Greek word oikos, which means house. So when we're talking about ecumenism, we're talking about everybody who lives in the house, the whole household of faith. And I'm prompted by Jesus' high priestly prayer in the Gospel of John, where he prays that all of his followers might be one. And he says, I have other sheep that belong to this fold, I must bring them to, I have to go and get them. So there is an evangelistic outlook in Jesus' mind, and also a concern that the church after his ascension would be one. And we are not there. This is something we have to confess that we are not there and have to work for. We just celebrated the 500th anniversary of the reforming movement, beginning through Martin Luther in Germany, where he was reading the Bible. And the other topic tonight was to do Bible. Reading the Bible and saying, oh, there's some things here about the gospel that have opened the gates of heaven to me. Luther was very concerned that he was a sinner. He felt it was a setup. He hated God because although he was a priest and a monk and a hermit in the Augustinian, St. Augustine's order, he felt it was a setup, that God had set things up that if you sinned, you suffered, and we couldn't be perfect. And that just was not right to him. It wasn't until he discovered grace in all of its fullness, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that Luther went, whoa, this is really great stuff. But our church doesn't seem to live that way in all of it, the way it could. And so he wrote 95 reasons why things about, especially paying with cash on the barrel for your own sins, seemed a problem. And I think everyone in the church agrees that that's the case today. But at the time, he compromised the funding system that was building St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. He was branded a heretic. A price was put on his life, and anyone who caught him could kill him. So that was the beginning of the first ecumenical dialogue. It didn't Oh well. Wars were fought over religion, and that continues to be the case today. Not to use too much of my time, but I have to say that Lutherans work hard at ecumenism. My own denomination is a merger of 3 prior Lutheran churches that came together 25 years ago, I think now, which is exciting. And we also have been doing ecumenical dialogue with Roman Catholics since 1965. We have full communion partners, which means that we share pulpit and altar fellowship and complete interchangeability of the clergy with the Presbyterian Church, the Reformed Church in America, and the United Church of Christ since 1997, since 1999 with the Moravian Church and the Episcopal Church, and in 2009 with the Methodists, United Methodist Church. We also have dialogues going all the time. Right now we have bilateral conversations going with the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, the Mennonite Church, the church of my ancestors on my father's mother's side, and have issued a declaration on the condemnation of Anabaptists from 500 years ago. Also with the Orthodox churches, and some very exciting dialogues with the Roman Catholic Church, including the declaration on the understanding of the justification by grace, grace by faith. There we are.
What you see the challenges are briefly, like what you see the challenges are for the gifts.
Well, the gifts was I got a wonderful husband. Wonderful partners. I've been engaged ecumenically and on an interfaith basis for the 42 years that I've been ordained. And in every community, people like the wonderful people in the Freehold Clergy Association, and in every community I've served, have come together to do several things. To work for justice, to make the community healthier, to support one another interpersonally, to work for wellness among clergy. Clergy work is stressful. We carry everybody else's concerns, we hear other people's secrets and carry them with us, we hear confessions, we're holding people's hands as they're dying. To be friends with one another is a life-giving thing that has meant very much to me and has kept me from going under multiple times over all those years. I just have to confess, my clergy comrades have been really life-giving partners in multiple ways. So the kinds of things that we want to do in Freehold are of that nature as well. You know, we have a wonderful ministry to homeless men. We're doing Latino suppers. We're doing the kinds of things that speak truth to power, that interact with the needs that we understand the community to have. So we're interested in knowing what you think we ought to be doing, because we view this as not top-down, but a community engagement kind of thing.
Okay, my first experience. Hello. My first experience as working with ecumenism and more about ecumenism was when I came here to the country, to the United States. I'm from Colombia, and just in 1991, we had a new constitution that allowed freedom of religion. So before that, the national religion was Catholic, a big population of Catholics. So now coming here, in which I can find the different aspects of religions. Then I went to Baltimore. I studied in St. Mary's Seminary, We have theological Catholic seminary, but also we have the ecumenical institution. For me, it was something completely new. You know, I learned in college back in Colombia about ecumenism, but just theory. But being here, see the different practices that we have. I had as a good, well-known teacher, Lutheran, in Ford. Then I saw I shared table with different Christians. So for me, it was a big impact to make that difference. I remember, Colombia, we had in my hometown, we have processions. And one of the ladies, she had a little store in the main street. And when we went out to processions with Our Lady of the Mount Carmel, which is the patron of my hometown, she was making noise. Oh, you are evil. You are going to hell. That was this experience with ecumenism. That was like, okay, we respect her, but it's okay. So, but coming here and see that this beautiful opportunity that we have from learn from each Christian's denominations, traditions, is important. From the Catholic perspective, ecumenism is really a gift. It's an opportunity for learn from different traditions. And the church divided the ecumenism in two main branches. The dialogue with the historical churches, like the Middle East, the Orthodox churches, those churches that from the beginning of Christianity, they were separated. Now, after the Reformation, we have the dialogue with those churches that came after the Reformation, those local churches that start in Europe. That's something that we need to take into account. We have beautiful documents in the church. In Vatican II, the church created like the basis of ecumenism in the Catholic Church. I hope that we Catholics learn about this document. Unitatis Redintegration, Decree on Ecumenism. Remember that, Decree on Ecumenism is from Vatican II. And that is the basis, the roots in which we're supposed to walk with other churches, with other Christian denominations. Today, John Paul II created a beautiful document on base of Vatican II called That They May Be One. That they may be one. And he presents different opportunities that we have been talking so far about how can we approach different faiths, how can we be together, how can we work together for the common good. And something that he emphasized is that we need to be focused in common ground. Focused in common ground. What unites us? What we have in common? What is our faith? What is our own baptism? What we celebrate? What we believe? That Jesus Christ is our Lord. That is salvation just in Jesus Christ. That we have the common ground like the Scripture, the Bible. Go to the Bible. There are many things that we can take into account when we are talking about ecumenism. And now, like I think 2 years ago, Pope Francis, he used a beautiful image talking about ecumenism. How can we approach dialogue with other Christian traditions? And he said that we need to think about to find ecumenism in service for the common good. We are working together for justice, for those who are without any privilege in our society, for those who are, we need to practice justice, those are after service for the common good. And other, ecumenism of blood. We share. You were talking with me a while ago about some Muslims from Japan. We have Christians who are dying around the world. Orthodox, Catholics, Protestants. So we have something in common. And that is something powerful that we have. The ecumenism in blood. People who believe in the Lord, they also give their life for their faith. So we have many things in common to work in in ecumenism as a Catholics, as a Christians. What is one of the greatest challenges? I think that first of all we need to recognize that there are differences. There are some differences. But among those differences, there is something that unites us, that is bigger than us, that is the Lord, that is Jesus Christ. And we need to start from there. And from there, probably we can reach one day that unity that we are looking for. So trying to fulfill what Jesus Christ asked the Lord before his death on the cross.
I'm the minister of First Baptist Church here in Freehold, and I apologize for being tardy. So, I'm going to start with like the worst place to start a discussion in a bar. Let's talk about history. I'm an American Baptist, and American Baptists are one of the earlier strains of the Baptist family tree. I won't go into their prehistory, but what got us started was an ecumenical impulse, founded on our doctrine of freedom of religion and freedom of the soul. So, y'all remember the Pilgrims, silly guys with the hats and the buckles on them? Yeah. So, they were leaving England to get away from how the Church of England was running at the time, and they made it to America and thought this was a great place to be, and they set up their church, and that became what is now the Congregational Church. And then the Baptists showed up because it was bad times for us over in England, and we said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a church? And they said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you paid to be a part of our church? And then the Church of England got over here and said to both of us, hey, wouldn't it be great if you paid to be a part of our church? So if you wanted to be a Baptist in that time, in that place, you had to pay your taxes to the Church of England, and you had to pay your taxes to the nascent Congregational Church, and then with any money you have to left, you'd have to go find a guy like me, who wasn't that good at talking in front of a group of people, and ask him to come lead your church. So, the reason we set ourselves on this path, the reason that we didn't find ourselves fully at home in the Church of England or in the nascent Congregational Church, was because we hold as a basic truth that everyone's soul is free to know God in their own way. We call it soul liberty or soul competency. Basically, your soul and your soul and your soul all have the same resources that mine or Pat's or Will's or Ariana's or Jen's do to seek out the divine as you understand, to seek out God as you understand. So, that primes us very well for ecumenism, because we don't have to agree on doctrine, and we don't have to agree on theology, and we don't have to agree on what color we want the carpet in the sanctuary to be, because I can acknowledge that your soul is free to know God, and that my soul is free to know God, and therefore we are journeying on the same path. Well, maybe not the same one. Parallel, converging, diverging paths. We're all walking up the mountain together. So, this primes us well for interfaith as well as Christian ecumenism. And I think one of the best strengths that we have is our willingness to be in dialogue with other denominations, other religions, and the stakes are lower for us in a lot of ways. We are what's called a low liturgical church. We don't have any sacraments in the sense that Catholics and Lutherans preserve sacramental understandings of things. We observe the same things, but we believe them to be things that we do with remembrance rather than things that transmit spiritual grace. And so that opens the door up for us because it doesn't impact our spiritual lives if we are welcome to receive communion at another table. As long as the invitation is open. And you'll find various groups that are better or worse about that. But I wanted to tell you specifically tonight about one instance of ecumenism that I'm involved in, and one that I find to be one of the most heartening ones. And it was actually started by Pat's husband. Pat's husband for 16 years?
I couldn't tell you. What were you talking about? Oh, yeah, 16.
Yeah. So for around 16 years, Pat's husband, Roy, was the General Secretary of the American Baptist Churches of the United States of America. And that means he was our top guy. And during that time, there was a lot of unrest. He came into his office just after 9/11, right? Just before 9/11. But still, in a time where it was a strange and dangerous thing to be a Muslim in this country and around the world. And one of the things that Roy responded to was the fact that our Muslim brothers and sisters are being marginalized, are being excluded, are being targeted. And so he reached out to members of the worldwide Muslim community and opened a dialogue. This year we had the 3rd annual Baptist Muslim, no, that was last year, 2018. We had the 3rd annual Baptist Muslim dialogue, and there were scholars from around the Muslim world. There were religious leaders from around the Muslim world. There were Baptist leaders and scholars there as well. And the thing that I want to tell you about, and this is what I want to tell you about ecumenism, every single person there pulled me aside because they knew I was Roy's pastor and he couldn't be there because he was recovering from an injury. And they told me about a personal conversation they had that had brought them into that conference and brought them into that fellowship. So when we look at our neighbors as individuals, as we forge relationships with them as individuals, we can change the world itself. We had people there from Pakistan, Iran, England, Liberia, a couple other countries from the sort of pan-Muslim world who were there because of one relationship. Not just because they thought it was a good and reasonable and righteous thing to do, not just because it aligned with their theological aims, but because a personal relationship allowed them the entry point to enter into this dialogue. And I think that is one of the strengths of ecumenism writ large, is that our personal relationships can have lasting and outsized effects, ones that we don't know when we're sort of having a small chat in a place like this. The relationships that you form and forge here can have effects that we cannot know the fruit of for many, many years. And there's something else I'm supposed to talk about, right?
Well, what we see our greatest gift from ecumenism is being, which I think you just touched on.
Yeah.
And the greatest challenge, if there are any, I'm not sure there are any.
Oh, sure. No. The greatest challenge to ecumenism is the flip side of that coin. The greatest challenge to ecumenism is you and me. There's the prejudices, the bitternesses, the subtle, petty things that we carry around from day to day that cause us to not see our neighbors as our neighbors or our friends, but cause us to see them as the other. That is the greatest challenge to ecumenism, and the best way to get around that is things like this, where we sit down and talk to each other.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so at this time, if you haven't finished your meal, please feel free to do so. Order something else, another drink or whatever, and start sending your questions in. So again, we have the link here, but some of us will be wandering around to get your questions as well in case you can't figure that out. And we'll put them on the link. And then we do have one held over from last week that really applied to today's session. So we'll address that one first. Okay, and then we'll get into the rest of them. All right.